Imagine you are a young soldier patrolling the hot, dusty streets of a foreign city. The midday sun beats down, sun-stunned and relentless, as you and your comrades scan the eerily quiet road ahead. Suddenly, movement. A figure darts out of a blown-out doorway. It's a looter sprinting away from a ransacked bank, clutching something, heart pounding. Imagine you shout for him to stop, but he keeps running. Adrenaline surges. You and two fellow soldiers raise your rifles. In a split second, you face an agonizing uncertainty. Is he armed or not? There's no time to be sure. Probably he has a gun, possibly not. Your finger hesitates only for a fraction of a moment before you open fire. The crack of gunshots shatter the silence. You see the bullets tear into the man's back. He stumbles and collapses on the ground. When you approach, the scene is horrifying. His body is sort of inside out, mangled by that hail of your gunfire. One of your mates, trying not to gag, tosses his guts back into his body, scooping the slippery red entrails and stuffing them in hastily. The corpse is heaved onto a truck, carted off in the back of some lorry, and with that, the incident seems to be over. End of story. You breathe out, trying to steady yourself. It's done, or so you think. Now, imagine coming home, weeks later, trying to forget that day. You're safe, on leave, in the comfort of your own home. But the memory will not leave you. Every time you close your eyes, he's there. One moment you're blinking in the sunlight on your quiet street back in England. The next he bursts through the doors of that bank again in your mind's eye. Night after night you jolt awake, heart hammering from the same nightmare. The looter running, the shout, the gunfire, his body falling. You can't sleep. You try drowning the vision in drink and drugs, but nothing can flush him out. The image of that bloody, broken man follows you like a shadow. Guilt gnaws at you. Perhaps he wasn't even armed. You see his blood stained onto your hands no matter how often you wash them. This is the living nightmare Simon Armitage captures in Remains. Hello and welcome to another episode of Study Sessions, the English Literature Revision podcast from St. George's. My name, of course, is Mr. Boff, and in today's episode, we are looking at Simon Armitage's poem Remains. So the purpose of today's episode is to guide you really through the poem, stanza by stanza, exploring, unpacking the language, its imagery, but also thinking about some of its key underlying themes, especially as they relate to power and conflict, and in fact, to be even more precise, the haunting power of memory. We will also consider, where it illustrates and illuminates the text, the poem's context, particularly the notion of PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, and understand really how repetition and flashbacks in the poem mirror the psychological impact of war trauma. So by the end of today's episode, you'll see why a subtle phrase like "his bloody life in my bloody hands" carries the weight of a Shakespearean guilt, and how Armitage's colloquial voice and vivid imagery creates a very powerful commentary on war's lasting scars, both physical and psychological. Let's begin our journey, though, by listening to a reading of the poem, immersing ourselves in its raw narrative and its insights. Remains by Simon Armitage. On another occasion, we get sent out to tackle looters raiding a bank, and one of them legs it up the road, probably armed, possibly not. Well, myself and somebody else are all of the same mind, so all three of us open fire. Three of a kind, all letting fly, and I swear I see every round as it rips through his life. I see broad daylight on the other side. So we've hit this looter a dozen times, and he's there on the ground, sort of inside out, pain itself, the image of agony. One of my mates goes by and tosses his guts back into his body. Then he's carted off in the back of a lorry. End of story, except not really. His blood shadow stays on the street, and out on patrol, I walk right over it week after week. Then I'm home on leave. But I blink, and he bursts in again through the doors of the bank. Sleep, and he's probably armed, possibly not. Dream, and he's torn apart by a dozen rounds. And the drink and the drugs won't flush him out. He's here in my head when I close my eyes, dug in behind enemy lines, not left for dead in some distant, sun-stunned, sand-smothered land or 6 feet under in desert sand, but near to the knuckle, here and now, his bloody life in my bloody hands. Having just listened to the poem, let's start with that first stanza, stanza 1, and the idea that it's setting the scene of conflict. So the first stanza is, on another occasion, we got sent out to tackle looters raiding a bank, and one of them legs it up the road, probably armed, possibly not. Here, Armitage plunges the reader straight into the action, or in media res, with those opening words, on another occasion. This phrase is casual and conversational, as if the narrator, the speaker, the soldier, poetic persona has been recounting multiple anecdotes of his recent tour of duty. The effect is almost jarring. There's no gentle introduction, there's no context. We're just as readers dropped into another occasion of conflict. And note how this immediately conveys that sense that violent incidents like this one are routine for the soldier. It is just one incident among many, one occasion among many. The tone is matter of fact, perhaps even, depending on your interpretation, even nonchalant. In a war zone, extraordinary events like shootouts, like the one being relayed in this poem, become ordinary, just another occasion. The use of that first-person plural in we got sent out positions the speaker as part of a team. Right away, the poem's voice is colloquial and therefore feels authentic, feels like a real soldier speaking. Phrases like got sent out instead of the more formal were deployed, and looters raiding a bank, very straightforward, unadorned, perhaps, depending on your view about poetry, rather unpoetic description, establish a down-to-earth vernacular or colloquial everyday use of language. This soldier is not speaking like a polished poet or an officer. He's speaking in the everyday language of an ordinary person and an ordinary soldier, which makes the narrative feel real and immediate. It also serves to engage the listener, as if we're hearing a very personal and intimate confession or story that someone might tell in a pub or a bar or a therapy session, rather than reading a distanced, formal report. In the second line, the task is plain and simple: to tackle looters raiding a bank. The word tackle suggests a physical confrontation or apprehension, almost like policing rather than soldiering. This hints at the blurred role of soldiers in modern conflicts. They are fighting war, but they're also having to deal with civilian crimes like looting. The mention of looters introduces an element of chaos and lawlessness that often accompanies conflict. War creates situations where normal law and order broken down, and desperate people steal to survive. Contextually, we can infer this likely takes place in a war like the Iraq War. It's important to note that the poem is based on a British soldier's account from Basra, Iraq, although Armitage doesn't explicitly name it. The effect here, a little bit like in The Emigre, is to make the scenario feel broadly representative of any conflict. Just like in the emigre, it universalizes the experience. This could be any soldier's experience in any modern war. Next comes an intense burst of action, and one of them legs it up the road. The idiom legs it is slang for runs away quickly. This informal phrase continues the colloquial tone established in the opening line, reinforcing the speaker's authentic voice. Rather than saying one of them runs away, Armitage chooses, purposefully, intentionally, legs it. And it's a choice that captures the urgency and almost comic, funny awkwardness of the looter's flight. You can almost picture the scene, the looter suddenly dashing off, legs pumping away. This small phrase also suggests a soldier's perspective on the looter. It depersonalizes the target. He's just one of them, and it focuses on the action. The use of present tense verbs, raiding, legs it, in this past narrative creates a cinematic immediacy. It's as if the scene is unfolding right now before our eyes, which is a hallmark of traumatic memory. The speaker relives it in the present tense, as we'll see later. Finally, the stanza ends with the line, probably armed, possibly not. This is a crucial phrase and quotation in the poem, and Armitage pointedly has the soldier voice the dilemma with this terse, balanced line. The structure is a two-part phrase, with a repetition of adverbs, probably, possibly, and that captures the soldier's split-second uncertainty about the looter. Is the man carrying a weapon or isn't he? The contrast between probably and possibly, and the hesitation inherent in possibly not, reveals the moral and literal uncertainty that underpins this encounter. It highlights a key theme of the text of the poem, the ambiguity of conflict. In war, decisions are often made on imperfect information. The soldier suspects the looter is armed, maybe based on intelligence or mere assumption, but he acknowledges the disturbing possibility that the looter might be innocent, possibly not armed. This internal conflict foreshadows the guilt that comes later. The soldier's conscience will obsess over this moment of doubt. Note too the plosive alliteration of probably, possibly. The sound is spat out in that staccato sort of way, which might reflect the quick, almost panic thinking, or even mimic the sound of gunfire popping. Even with these first four lines, Armitage has set up the central incident, soldiers confront a looter, and introduced the poem's conversational style and moral ambiguity. The casual tone, on another occasion, legs it, juxtaposed with life and death stakes, armed or not, immediately engages the listener's emotions and intellect. As we proceed, keep in mind how this opening scene, a man running and soldiers making that fateful decision, is the seed, the origin of traumatic memory that will later haunt the speaker. The phrase probably armed, possibly not will echo through the poem, much as it echoes in the soldier's mind, indicating the psychological conflict born in and out of this moment. Now, in stanza 2, we can think about the killing and also this moment of collective action and responsibility. So stanza 2 is, well, myself and somebody else are all of the same mind, so all three of us open fire. 3 of a kind, all letting fly, and I swear. The second stanza zooms in on the soldier's response. It begins with another conversational filler, well, starting a line and stanza with well, as if the speaker is continuing a story he's already started, adds further to the natural speech-like rhythm of the poem. It sounds like he's talking to us, confiding in us perhaps, directly. maybe remembering aloud. This immediacy is key to Armitage's dramatic monologue style. We feel like we're listening to a real person recount a real event. Notice the phrasing, myself and somebody else and somebody else. Instead of specifying who these others are, for example, two other soldiers, or actually giving us names, the speaker uses a rather vague somebody else twice. This repetitive, undefined reference has a few different effects on us as readers. First, it reflects the fog of memory, and perhaps the soldier's attempt to generalize or make anonymous his comrades, as if the details of exactly who was with him at the time, maybe that's not important, or it's blurred in recollection. It could also suggest that in the heat of this moment, individual identities didn't matter. They acted as a collective unit. And that repetition, somebody else and somebody else, conveys that kind of collective action and shared responsibility. By emphasizing that it wasn't just myself or himself, but two others as well, the speaker might be unconsciously trying to spread or share the blame or guilt. It's not I alone who shot the looter, we all did it together. This is a sort of psychological shield. If everyone did it, it feels, therefore, less like one person's burden or responsibility. The casual vagueness, not even saying two others, but the strangely looping somebody else, might also hint at a trauma response. The speaker is distancing themselves from the event, distancing themselves from talking about it. The line, are all of the same mind, reinforces that unity. It implies that without needing to discuss it, all three soldiers instinctively in the moment seem to agree on what to do. They perceive a threat and they decide to shoot. The phrase carries a slightly chilling tone, what might be understood as groupthink in combat. In a split second, they reach an identical conclusion. The poem doesn't explicitly say why they're of the same mind, but we can infer this. Maybe they fear for their own safety. Maybe it's training kicking in, the so-called rules of engagement. Maybe it's a sense of anger at the looter, a resentment that the looter is doing what he's doing. This line underscores a theme of the automatic, conditioned nature of soldiers' responses in conflict. They've been trained to respond to a potential threat in a certain way. Here, to open fire if they think the suspect is armed. There's also maybe an implication of peer pressure or a feeling of the need to conform. If one starts shooting, they all shoot. Following this, the direct statement, so all three of us open fire, is blunt and forceful. We've got that monosyllabic phrase, open fire, and it really lands hard at the end of the line, corresponding to the harsh action it denotes. Armitage's use of simple diction, simple word choice, open fire instead of something more perhaps elaborate or figurative, conveys the sudden violence in very plain terms. The line, as a result, has a kind of abruptness. Bang, they open fire, which mirrors the gunfire itself. There's no hesitation described here. The uncertainty of possibly not is overridden by the group's quick decision. This can lead us to discuss the theme of action versus conscience. In the moment, the soldiers act on training and impulse, but only later will the moral weight of that decision start to settle in. The next line furthers this image of unified action. Three of a kind, all letting fly. The phrase three of a kind is interesting. It's an idiom one might associate with card games, like three matching cards in the game of poker. It's an unexpected, almost ironic comparison in the context of killing a man. This could perhaps subtly suggest that the soldiers are like three identical cards, almost interchangeable, emphasizing the dehumanization or the idea of soldiers as units in a broader game of war. It might also hint at the luck of the draw. In another draw of the cards, perhaps the looter's fate or the soldier's actions could have been different. The casual tone persists. Letting fly is another colloquialism, meaning to fire freely or even to attack verbally or physically and without restraint. By letting fly, Armitage captures both the literal act of bullets flying out of their guns and the lack of restraint. They unleash their bullets without holding back. The alliteration of F in fly and maybe the echo of fire, fly gives that sense of speed and of force. Up to this point, the violence has been described collectively. We open fire, three of a kind letting fly. But then we get a shift, and I swear. The line break, the dash suggests it carries over to the next stanza, is really important. The sudden use of the first person singular I instead of the collective we marks a turn inward. It's as if at the climax of the shooting, the speaker steps forward in his narrative and takes personal ownership of what he sees. The phrase I swear then has a dual function. Colloquially, to say I swear is to insist that what follows is true. He wants us to believe the vividness of what he's about to describe. It also carries a tone of awe or disbelief at what he's witnessing, as in, I swear I saw it, it was unbelievable. Additionally, swear could hint at a swear word, a kind of mild oath or curse, reflecting strong emotion, shock, horror at the sight. The enjambment here, I swear, carried over to the next stanza's description, creates a real feeling of suspense. The listener and the reader is held momentarily. What does he swear? What has he seen? This technique propels us as readers forward, mirroring how the soldier's mind is now fixated on the details of the act he's just committed. Overall, stanza 2 emphasizes collective action, but then turns into a singular personal experience. The group acts together to kill the looter, but as we'll see, it's the individual soldier's mind that will suffer afterwards. The language is very telling, from we to I, from calm descriptions to that sudden emotional interjection, I swear. Armitage carefully crafts this transition to prepare us for the intense graphic imagery that is to follow and to highlight a central idea. Namely, in war, soldiers often act as one unit, but each one of them will carry the memory privately. So, stanza 3. We've got some very graphic imagery here in this moment of death. I see every round as it rips through his life. I see broad daylight on the other side. So we've hit this looter a dozen times and he's there on the ground, sort of inside out. If the previous stanza built up the act of shooting, stanza 3 thrusts us as readers into the slow motion horror of its impact. The speaker continues from I swear to paint an extraordinary, very graphic mental picture. I see every round as it rips through his life. It's a line, I think, that demands close analysis at the word level. Let's first consider I see every round. The word round is military jargon for a bullet or shell. By using round instead of just bullet, Armitage maintains the soldier's authentic voice and familiarity with weapons. Every round suggests multiple bullets. It implies a lot of shots were fired. Indeed, in the next lines, he rather hyperbolically says a dozen times. The fact that the speaker claims to see each bullet hit is striking. In real time, bullets travel obviously far faster than we can see, so this line conveys a sort of distorted perception, a common aspect of traumatic events where time seems to slow down in one's memory. It's as if in his recollection, or shock and trauma, the soldier relives the moment in slow motion, visualizing each bullet tearing into the looter. The phrase I see is repeated not only here but twice in the stanza, emphasizing the visceral visual memory that haunts him. He is forced, in effect, to re-watch the killing in his mind's eye on a loop. Next, the chilling phrase rips through his life. It's a phrase that encapsulates both physical and metaphorical violence. Literally, bullets rip through his body, but Armitage chooses life instead of body. The word choice highlights that the gunfire is destroying more than just flesh, it's extinguishing a living human being's life, and their identity, and their potential future. It's what we could see as a powerful metonym. Life here stands for the entire existence of the looter. The verb rips is notably brutal. It connotes tearing, that forceful ripping apart, something savage, animalistic, primitive, merciless. The harsh monosyllabic sound of rip, with that sharp rip almost cutting the air, mirrors the harshness of the act itself. This is a single line that weaves in the idea that in war, taking life can happen in an instant, and it's an instant of extreme violence. The casual tone from earlier is completely gone. Instead, we've got a solemn, serious, horrified tone. The soldier swears he sees it happen. It's an image he can never forget. The line ends with a dash, and that obviously is an indicator of a pause or a break. This could be read as the speaker trailing off for a moment, perhaps stunned by the memory. It also leads dramatically onto the next line, which continues with the same sentence, I see broad daylight on the other side. This is a gruesome hyperbole, or perhaps an actual observation to illustrate how completely the man was shot through. It could suggest that the bullets have torn the looter apart, literally punctured him so badly that you can see through holes in his body. It's as if his body is now hollow, the light is passing through. The image is horrific, it's vivid, showing the extreme gore and violence of the scene, but doesn't use the word blood. That comes later. Instead, Armitage uses daylight ironically, I think. Usually something positive. Think about daylight and sunlight in something like The Emigre. It's here associated with death and mutilation. Seeing daylight through a person implies massive wounds. From a literary standpoint, it's almost a shock tactic employed by Armitage. We feel, we see, we are exposed to the brutality of war. That repetition of I see, produces a sense that the soldier is mesmerized or fixated by what he's witnessed. It's burned or etched into his visual memory. Then, after describing the killing in almost cinematic detail, the speaker steps back a little bit. So we've hit this looter a dozen times. The casual tone seems to resurface. So, it's like he's summarizing the result. We shot him repeatedly, a dozen times. It's likely a bit of an exaggeration, or possibly the speaker's rough, horrified guess of how many bullets actually struck the man. The number dozen suggests excess, far more than is necessary to just kill a person. This conveys the overkill often seen in tense combat situations. All three soldiers emptied their magazines into the target. It also implicitly questions the justice of the act. 12 shots for one man, probably not armed, hints at overreaction. The way the speaker states it, matter-of-factly, can be read in two ways. Either he's numb, and he's trying to stay detached by reporting it in a sort of flat affect or in a rather emotionless sort of way, or he's acknowledging with implicit disbelief just how extreme it was. We really shot him that many times. The plural we've again shows him attributing the act to the group and not just himself. Then Armitage delivers one of the most disturbing images in a poem that has lots of disturbing images, and he's there on the ground sort of inside out. The phrase, he's there on the ground, starkly contrasts with the looter's earlier action of running. Now the man lies lifeless, which is emphasized by the use of that simple present tense, he's there, as if in the speaker's mind, that's where the looter is forever frozen. The colloquial hedging language, sort of, the kind of thing that we say when we're reaching for a description, we're not quite sure how to articulate something, sort of, is doing a lot of work here. Sort of inside out shows that struggle to articulate the horror. It's like he can't find the precise words for the gore and falls back on a almost childish descriptor. Something is so horrifying it's indescribable, kind of inside out. This understatement via colloquial language, paradoxically, puzzlingly, cleverly, I think, from Armitage perspective, emphasizes the gore. Imagine a body literally inside out, entrails spilled, internal organs visible. The soldier says it in a sort of offhand way, sort of inside out. Maybe this is a coping mechanism, downplaying the atrocity to make it speakable, make the unspeakable speakable. But that juxtaposition of a casual tone with a ghastly, horrific, and gory image is really unsettling. Armitage is using it to show how soldiers might normalize or blunt the horror of what they see, because it's too much to process directly. The words inside out also dehumanize the victim. He's not described as a person with emotions, just a gruesome figure of pain itself, as the next line will continue. In this stanza, Armitage's graphic imagery forces us to confront the physical reality of violence. Note how the language shifts. The relatively measured tone of stanza 2, open fire, letting fly, to an almost hallucinatory vividness here, rips through his life, broad daylight on the other side. It's a shift that reflects the soldier's memory zooming in on the scene. These are the details that will haunt him. The stanza underscores the theme of conflict's brutality. The human body is rendered fragile, destructible, and there's a real implicit sense of waste, a life ripped apart. But it's also a turning point emotionally. The soldier has moved from action to the immediate aftermath. We as readers are made to feel shock and pity for the victim, perhaps also for the soldier who witnesses this at the same time. Let's shift now to stanza 4. So we're thinking about the aftermath, the handling of the casualty, the dead or dying looter, and that sense of lingering guilt. Pain itself, the image of agony. One of my mates goes by and tosses his guts back into his body, then he's carted off in the back of a lorry. So the fourth stanza continues directly from the previous line, painting further the gruesome aftermath and showing how the soldiers react. It opens with pain itself, the image of agony. This phrase is describing the fallen looter, essentially equating him to pain personified. The man is pain itself, the speaker conveying that the sight is nothing but pure suffering. The looter's contorted, shredded body becomes the embodiment of agony, agony made flesh or incarnate. This is a very powerful use of metaphor. The man is no longer described with any humanizing detail. He's like an icon, a symbol of pain. The word agony is absolute in its expression of suffering, and calling the body the image of agony suggests that this scene is a picture that will imprint itself in the soldier's mind, like a photograph of agony that he cannot unsee. It might also imply that in that moment, the soldier is keenly aware of the pain he's caused. The victim's agony is evident, and thus the guilt is starting to creep in, even if the soldier doesn't articulate it as guilt just yet. Describing someone as pain itself is laden with horror and with remorse. There's a telling shift immediately after this intense description. One of my mates goes by. Suddenly, the focus moves outward to another soldier and an almost mundane action. The phrase goes by sounds very casual, as if this is just something happening in passing. Again, this could indicate how in war there's a procedure that kicks in after a shooting. The soldiers have jobs to do, almost routinely. The term mates is colloquial English, British English slang for friends or close associates. Here, it refers to his fellow comrades as soldiers. Using mates keeps the informal register established at the beginning and also reminds us that these are close comrades, people who have to deal with this situation collectively together. The casualness of goes by belies the gravity and seriousness of what that mate is about to do, tosses his guts. back into his body. This is one of the poem's most horrific images. The verb tosses is especially striking. To toss here means to throw or fling casually, like tossing a ball or tossing away rubbish in the bin. The idea that the soldier tosses the looter's guts, intestines, internal organs, back into his body suggests an alarming nonchalance, or maybe a desperate rush sort of pragmatism. It's as if the body has been so mutilated that the organs are spilling out, and the soldier's reaction is just sort of shove them back in, perhaps to make the corpse easier to move, or a sort of grim attempt at tidiness. This act exemplifies the dehumanizing effects of war. The looter is this lump of flesh, a lifeless body being handled with a kind of rough indifference. Describing the entrails as his guts is again blunt and colloquial. There's no euphemism, it's just gore in plain, unadorned language. The image is undeniably grotesque, and it's intended to haunt the reader, as clearly it haunts the speaker too. Why tosses? Armitage could have used puts or places, but tosses conveys that sense of haste and carelessness. This is why word level analysis is so important and can be so rich in our responses. It might reflect shock. The soldier doesn't want to look too closely or touch the remains any longer than is strictly necessary, so he flings them or tosses them back in. But it also carries a sort of moral weight. The dead man is being treated here with absolutely no dignity, as if the body is just meat, as I've said. This will weigh on our speaker's conscience as part of the guilt. Notice how he watches his mate doing this. He doesn't say I did it, but he does watch it. He's a witness. The soldier narrating the story, the narrative of the poem, is almost detached in describing this moment. Maybe he's in shock. Maybe he's narrating it after the fact with this numb tone to cope with how awful it truly was. The stanza ends with, then he's carted off in the back of a lorry. Here, he refers to the body of the looter. The phrase carted off is another piece of this very casual language. It's often used to refer to removing debris or rubbish. To say a human body is carted off is callous, unfeeling, reflecting how in war a corpse might be treated as just another object to be cleared from the scene. It also implies that for the military unit, once the body is removed, the incident is officially over, hence the ironic phrase in the next stanza, end of story. The vehicle, a lorry, that like a truck, hints again at the British soldier's context. Including that detail, solidifies the realism. A body is loaded onto a truck, probably to be taken to some sort of military base or morgue. There's no ceremonial removal, just an efficient, brisk clearing away of the remains. That brisk, quick, speedy efficiency of carted off and the finality of removing the body stand in stark contrast to the lingering emotional impact. It's as if the external process wraps up neatly, while the internal turmoil is only just beginning. Structurally, notice how this stanza, and the ones before, have been largely one long continuous narrative of the shooting and its aftermath. Armitage is using lots of enjambment here to carry us forward. We haven't really had a full stop since the poem started. Everything has been flowing with commas or line breaks, and it feels rather breathless, this ongoing feel, much like how a traumatic event can feel like one long moment. That's going to change soon. Another turning point. So in this stanza, we see Armitage's use of very stark imagery, guts, blood, although blood's implied here by guts, and later we're going to get a blood shadow, and that colloquial language, mates, tosses, carted off, illustrating the immediate aftermath of violence. The tone moves between or oscillates between shock and horror and a increasingly, I think, forced casualness. This reflects the soldier's coping mechanism. Confronted with that image of agony, he responds with a sort of practiced, trained nonchalance, doing what needs to be done, maybe joking or acting unfazed externally, even as the horror surely is seeping in psychologically and internally. We should note how these details set up the speaker's later flashbacks. He recalls vividly not just the killing, but also the detail of his friend picking up the entrails, which is something no person is clearly ever going to forget easily. It's a grotesque memory, and it's a memory that will stick. The stage is now set in the poem for a key shift, from physical event to psychological aftermath. And this is a shift that begins with a deceptively simple phrase in the next stanza. End of story, except not really. So, stanza 5, end of story, except not really. His blood shadow stays on the street, and out on patrol, I walk right over it week after week. Then I'm home on leave, but I blink. At the opening of stanza 5, Armitage introduces a line that functions as a turning point or a volta in the poem's focus and tone. End of story, except not really. Up until now, the poem has recounted a single incident in gruesome detail, as if telling a war story. Here, end of story suggests that in a literal sense, the narrative of that incident is over. The loot has been shot and removed. The mission's done. The phrase end of story is another idiomatic expression used or often used by people to conclude a little story they tell, an account, an anecdote, or to imply, oh, that's all there is to it. It's something people say to finalize a matter, end of story. But Armitage immediately subverts this implicit sense of closure with, except not really. The caesura, that break marked by a comma after end of story, creates a pause, maybe a sigh, before the speaker admits that it's not truly the end. This line is crucial because it succinctly captures, it's a distillation, we might say, of the poem's central theme. The events of war may finish physically, but they do not end in the mind of the soldier. The blunt dismissal, not really, has a conversational humility to it, as if the speaker is confiding in us that what he initially thought, that he could draw a line under the incident, turned out to be false. It's an anticlimax that sets the stage for the real subject of the poem, trauma and memory. We should also note where the poem transitions from that external action to the internal hauntings. The soldier's story doesn't end with the body being carted off. It continues in his psyche. Following this critical line, Armitage uses a haunting image to show how the dead looter lingers in the soldier's life, his kind of psychological life and his day-to-day life. His blood shadow stays on the street, and that term, blood shadow, a compound noun coined by Armitage, refers to the dark stain, the dried blood left on the street where the man fell. Visualize, please, a shadow-like patch of blood that remains long after the body is gone. But the word is also deeply metaphorical. A shadow is a faint imprint or image left behind when the object is no longer there. Here it signifies that although the corpse is gone, a part of him, a part of the looter, his blood, perhaps representing his life, remains, staining the ground. This blood shadow is both literal, a stain on the ground, on the road, or wherever it's taken place, and also symbolic, the memory of the killing that follows the soldier like a shadow. Shadows, we know, follow people around, and that implies that the stain, the memory, follows a soldier in his mind. The line continues, and out on patrol, I walk right over it, week after week. The phrasing is telling. The blood shadow stays on the street. It's persistent. And the soldier, when on patrol again at that location, finds himself literally walking over the spot where the man died week after week. This indicates that time has passed, weeks, and suggests some sort of cycle or kind of military routine. Every time he goes on patrol, he is forced to confront that stain and that reminder. It is, in fact, a constant reminder of what happened. The fact he says, I walk right over it, might at first sound indifferent, as if he's disregarding it. But the very mention of it betrays that he notices it every single time. This is a moment and a set of lines in the poem that are really heavy with irony. Physically, he steps over it, as if to avoid it, or maybe as if it's nothing. Mentally, it's clearly not nothing. The repetition of the w sound week after week is perhaps a subtle form of anaphora, emphasizing the relentless, repeated nature of his confrontation with that traumatic memory. The soldier cannot escape psychologically and physically, even in his daily duties. It's literally under his feet. An important structural note here: end of story, except not really. It's a short, self-contained sentence which stands out after all of the enjambment and flowing narrative earlier on in the poem. It's like a brief moment of reflection or commentary by the speaker, almost breaking that story he was telling. After that, his blood shadow stays on the street, and so on. The sentences lengthen again. But notice how the pace and the focus have shifted to the present continuous experience. The stain stays. I walk over it regularly. This stanza is the bridge between past event and ongoing present trauma. The last line of the stanza, then I'm home on leave, but I blink, is pivotal as it leads into the full onset of PTSD type symptoms described in the next stanza. Let's unpack it. Then I'm home on leave. This indicates the soldier's finally getting a break, returns home from the war zone, hoping for some kind of respite. The word then suggests progression. After the weeks of patrolling and stepping over the blood, now at least he's temporarily away from the conflict environment. Home on leave usually connotes or is associated with safety, comfort, a return to normality. One might expect that being removed from the war setting would bring relief. However, Armitage immediately upends or subverts that expectation, but I blink. The conjunction but signals a contrast, preparing for us as readers that something's going to go wrong. The phrase I blink is wonderfully concise, representing the almost mundane split-second action, yet that is all it takes, just a simple, straightforward blink for the nightmare to continue. The stanza break here, with the dash indicating continuation, is very, very effective structurally. It mimics the literal blink of an eye. One moment, he's at home blinking. The next moment, as we'll see in the next stanza, the looter bursts again into his consciousness. Armitage even places blink at the end of the line, with the dash suggesting that what comes after the blink is sudden and startling. Observe how enjambment here and line breaks serve meaning. There is enjambment from out on patrol to I walk right over it, showing the continuous act of patrolling over the stain. Life goes on externally. But at the then I'm home on leave, but I blink dash, we likely have this line break or stanza right after the blink to give us a forced pause. Exactly like the moment of closing one's eyes, a brief darkness before the memory invades. It creates tension and expectation for the reader. So stanza 5 then is the turning point, where the poem shifts explicitly from external events to internal conflict. The phrase not really and the image of the blood shadow convey that the memory has become now psychologically embedded. It introduces the theme of the haunting power of memory and the memory we have of conflict, or at least the soldier has of conflict. He's haunted by the ghost of blood on the street. And we get that first hint of PTSD type behavior, the fixation on the site of trauma and the inability to move on, even whilst physically away from it, home on leave. This poetically prepares the ground for an exploration of trauma and maybe specifically PTSD in the coming lines, as the poem delves into flashbacks and psychological distress. In stanza 6, we get flashbacks and this idea of the past invading the present. So, stanza 6, and he bursts again through the doors of the bank. Sleep, and he's probably armed, possibly not. Dream, and he's torn apart by a dozen rounds. And the drink and the drugs won't flush him out. Stanza 6 delivers a vivid depiction of flashbacks and nightmares, showing how the traumatic event replays itself involuntarily in the soldier's mind. Coming right after "but I blink," the first line here completes that action, and he bursts again through the doors of the bank. The pronoun he refers, of course, to the looter, the dead man. The verb bursts is dynamic and violent, indicating sudden forceful movement. It suggests that in the soldier's mind, as soon as he closes his eyes, he blinks, the memory explodes back into view with the same intensity as the original moment. The phrase, through the doors of the bank, situates us back at the very start of the incident, essentially resetting the scene to the moment the looter ran out and legs it up the road. This shows a classic flashback. The soldier involuntarily re-experiences the event as if it's happening again. The word again is crucial. It signals that this is a recurring experience, not a one-time memory. He's likely seen this replay in his head countless times. The next two lines have a parallel structure that's very striking. Sleep, and he's probably armed and possibly not. Dream, and he's torn apart by a dozen rounds. Armitage uses a kind of anaphora here, with sleep and dream starting each clause, highlighting two states of unconsciousness, falling asleep and dreaming, in which the trauma intrudes. It produces a sense of horrible, grim inevitability, whether in the lighter phase of nodding off or in deeper dreams, the dead man appears regardless. The use of present tense, he's probably armed, in describing the dream underscores how real and present these flashbacks feel. In post-traumatic stress disorder, the past is relived as the present. Importantly, Armitage brings back the exact wording from stanza 1, he's probably armed and possibly not. The repetition of this line is, I think, a poetic masterstroke in portraying mental torment. It shows that the soldier's mind returns obsessively to that doubt about the looter's weapon. It's not just a memory, it's a guilt-ridden question that haunts him. What if he wasn't armed? The fact it recurs in his sleep suggests he can't escape the moral uncertainty of his action. Again, it's worth noting how this repetition ties into the structure of the poem and ties structure to meaning. The line recurs just as the memory recurs. It also emphasizes the theme of guilt and moral ambiguity, that one line encapsulated his doubts during the event, and now it epitomizes. It is as I've said before, a distillation of his regret. In a way, his conscience is interrogating him every night with possibly not. The slight difference here is the addition of sleep and at the beginning of the line, which almost reads like an instruction or horrible inevitability. When I try to sleep, then this happens. The following line, dream and he's torn apart by a dozen rounds, continues this structure. Torn apart by a dozen rounds mirrors the earlier description that they hit him a dozen times and that he was sort of inside out. It's the nightmare version of the same event. Torn apart vividly describes what the bullets did to the man, emphasizing the dismemberment and the extreme violence that went on. Notice that in the soldier's dreams there is no ambiguity. The soldier is definitely being shredded by bullets. The pairing of these two lines, probably armed versus torn apart by a dozen rounds, shows two facets or different aspects of his trauma: the guilt, wondering if the killing was justified, and the horror, reliving the graphic violence. It's as though his mind is alternating or oscillating between questioning the morality and replaying the gore. The use of sleep and dream as parallel openers and the repeated and creates a relentless rhythm, mimicking just how one thought leads to the next in an unbroken chain of trauma during the night. Finally, the stanza concludes with a line of despair, and the drink and the drugs won't flush him out. This is the first time the speaker explicitly reveals his coping mechanisms and his psychological struggle. The alliterative phrase drink and drugs indicates he's been resorting to alcohol and drugs or other drugs to cope with his memories. The fact that both drink and drugs are mentioned suggests a level of desperation. He's trying anything to numb himself. The conjunction and at the very start of the line connects this to the previous thoughts, implying that even after sleepless nights and horrific dreams, His next step is self-medication, but it's futile. It's utterly ineffective. The phrase won't flush him out is also particularly noteworthy. Flush out is a term often used in a military context, meaning to drive an enemy out of hiding, like flushing them from cover. Here, the soldier's trying to flush out the intruder in his mind. That's the memory of the dead looter, treating it like an enemy to be sort of purged. It's a metaphor that equates the unwanted memory with an enemy in sort of entrenched in his mind. It's a comparison that's going to be extended in the next stanza with that line dug in behind enemy lines. Additionally, flush out is commonly used for expelling something from the body, like, flushing out toxins or waste. The soldier likely drinks to black out or uses drugs to dull the pain, attempting to cleanse or purge himself of this haunting image and memory, but it doesn't work. The alliteration of drink, drugs, that hard D sound, can sound like the soldier spitting out these words in frustration. The line ends with yet another dash, indicating that this thought is not complete, and indeed it carries on into the next stanza. The use of yet more enjambment conveys this ongoing sense of struggle. There's no full stop, reflecting that nothing has put a full stop to the presence of the looter in his mind. At this particular juncture in the podcast, and obviously also in the poem, it's clear that the speaker is portraying classic symptoms of PTSD. The soldier experiences flashbacks, he bursts again, nightmares, dream, and he's torn apart, and he turns to substance abuse, drink and drugs to cope, all of which are recognized signs of PTSD. The repetition of the traumatic event in his thoughts is incessant. So we turn now to the enemy within, and this idea of the memory and the soldier sort of entrenched in his mind. This is in stanza 7. He's here in my head when I close my eyes, dug in behind enemy lines, not left for dead in some distant, sun-stunned, sand-smothered land or 6 feet under in desert sand. Stanza 7 continues seamlessly from the previous line. There's a dash indicating that the thought carries over. The soldier now articulates very explicitly the presence of the looter's memory in his mind. He's here in my head when I close my eyes. It's almost a literal definition of being haunted by memory. The colloquial simplicity of here in my head makes the statement very powerful and poignant. The dead man is not a ghost in a horror movie, but a psychological ghost living inside the speaker's brain. When I close my eyes directly references the act of trying to sleep or even just blinking, tying back to the blink from earlier on. Every time the speaker closes his eyes, the looter is present. And this reinforces how inescapable the vision is. Even blinking can trigger it. The next line introduces a potent metaphor dug in behind enemy lines. Here, the speaker compares the presence of the dead man in his mind to a soldier entrenched deep in enemy territory. This is really rich with meaning. Dug in is a military term describing troops who've entrenched themselves into a position that's hard to attack. Think of soldiers in trenches, firmly established and difficult to dislodge. By saying the looter, or indeed the memory of him, is dug in behind enemy lines, the soldier suggests that the memory has taken a secure, defensive position inside his consciousness. Behind enemy lines implies the memory is within the speaker's own side of the battle, because from the memory's perspective, the soldier's mind might be enemy territory. It's quite complicated. One way to interpret this is that the soldier's rational mind, or his current self, considers this intrusive memory as a sort of enemy invader. The memory has penetrated into his psyche, behind enemy lines, inside the soldier's mental defenses, and is now stuck there, like a stubborn enemy can't root out. This metaphor vividly portrays the psychological battle of PTSD. The soldier's new war is one against the memories in his own head. But there's an irony here too. The speaker is a soldier by profession, trained to fight enemies in combat. Yet the one enemy he cannot defeat is the memory of the man he himself killed. The phrase dug in also recalls the attempt to flush him out with drugs and drink from the previous stanza. Clearly, that attempt failed because the memories dug in too deeply. In terms of sound, always very important in poetry, dug in behind enemy lines has a rhythmic weight to it. That consonant d alliteration in dug, softly echoing the long vowel sounds in behind and lines. It gives it an almost heavy, trudging feel, appropriate for something stuck firmly. Next, the speaker contrasts where the looter is not. The lines, not left for dead in some distant, sun-stunned, sand-smothered land, or 6 feet under in desert sand. It draws a stark contrast between where the body physically is and where the memory resides. Left for dead is an idiom meaning abandoned after fatal injury. In context, the looter was indeed left dead and taken away. The speaker imagines, or maybe wishes, that the looter and all that relates to him had been left behind in some distant land. The use of distant highlights that the war zone is far away from home. It's physically removed. The alliterative compound adjectives sun-stunned, sand-smothered paint a vivid picture of the environment of that conflict. Sun-stunned suggests a place so hot and bright that it's dazing or stunning. A person can be sun-stunned, dizzy, overwhelmed by the harsh sun. Sand-smothered suggests a landscape choked, blanketed by sand, an image of a desert or a really arid place. Together, these words evoke Middle Eastern desert. Again, I think it's hinting at the Iraq location, but without naming it. We've got really heavy sibilants, those repeated S sounds, sun-stunned, sand-smothered. It slows the line, this harsh whispering sound, perhaps reflecting the suffocating atmosphere of that land and the way those memories smother the speaker. The hyphenated compounds also show how that land is defined by overwhelming climate and terrain. It's foreign, it's hostile, it's in a way almost surreal. The phrase some distant sun-stunned sand-smothered land is one of the very few instances of poetic flourish in an otherwise very colloquial poem. The imagery here is almost lyrical in its alliteration and rhythm, and it stands out. It's as if the soldier, in describing where the body should have remained, momentarily at least, waxes poetic. Maybe this emphasizes how he yearns for that neat separation. The war and its horrors over there, far away, separate from his life here. It also might reflect how memories of war come with recollections of landscape, the heat, the sand. It's all part of the same sensory package haunting him. Continuing to that next line, or 6 feet under in desert sand, 6 feet under is a common euphemism for being buried. 6 feet under the ground is a traditional burial depth. By saying 6 feet under in desert sand, the speaker is imagining that the looter previously buried and left in the desert, that's where he's died and he's buried. The repetition of sand from the previous line connects these ideas. The distant land he references is indeed a desert land. So the soldier's expressing that the dead man is not resting peacefully in a grave far away. He's not gone, despite being killed. Instead, the man's essence or psychological imprint is here. And these lines collectively underscore the central irony. The soldier physically left the war behind, and the looter's corpse is literally buried or abandoned in a far-off land. Yet in the soldier's mind, the looter lives on. The use of the negative not at the start of these lines, not left for dead or 6 feet under, accentuates that the speaker's expectation or wish that the dead stay dead and gone is contradicted by his psychological reality. So in this stanza, Armitage essentially has the soldier spell out the theme. The conflict has followed him home. The memory is an enemy within, entrenched in his mind. There's also a continuation of war imagery, enemy lines, distant land, desert sand, which blurs that boundary between the physical battleground and the psychological battleground. The speaker's use of opposites, here in my head, versus that distant land, emphasizes the collision of two worlds, home versus war zone, due to trauma. No, how the tone has shifted at this point. There's a resignation and a sorrow. Earlier on, the events are described maybe in a slightly flippant way. Now he speaks in metaphors of war about his own mind, indicating a deep self-awareness of his broken state. These lines feel like the soldier is lamenting, a wish that the dead would stay buried, an anguish that they haven't. All that remains now is that final couplet where Armitage concludes the poem with a gut punch line that encapsulates the speaker's guilt and the permanence of what has happened. So, that final couple of lines, living with guilt. But near to the knuckle, here and now, his bloody life in my bloody hands. The poem's last two lines form a short, isolated stanza, a final couplet that delivers a resolution, or rather a lack of resolution, in very compact form. They flow directly from stanza 7, note the beginning but, which connects to the prior not or but structure, yet they stand apart as a conclusion. Let's examine the second to last line. But near to the knuckle here and now. The conjunction but contrasts all the previous not clauses. The looter was not left behind in the desert, but is instead near to the knuckle. The idiom near to the knuckle is itself worth unpicking analytically. It's a phrase meaning close to the bone or too close for comfort, often used to describe something as offensively frank or too personal. In this context, near to the knuckle conveys that the issue, the presence of the dead man, is extremely close and pressing. It's not distant at all. It suggests the memory is hitting a raw nerve. It's uncomfortably close to the speaker's sense of self and sanity. Also, literally, the knuckle is part of the hand, and in the next line we'll get hands. There's perhaps a subtle wordplay, a bit of wordplay or punning here. The memory is near to his hands, figuratively, implying that he feels the blood on his hands. It's as if the ghost of the man is right next to him, or at his side, or in his head at this very moment, here and now. And that's a phrase, here and now, that reinforces the sense of immediacy. Despite all of his attempts to rid himself of the memory, time passing, being at home, using drink and drugs, the looter's presence is a current reality for the speaker. Here and now emphasizes that present tense. The trauma is not confined to the past, it's an ongoing one. It's also a phrase that connotes reality versus illusion. One might say to, a student, focus on the here and now, to mean focus on what's real and present. Ironically, the soldier's here and now is the hallucination or the memory of the dead man. It's become a part of his real, present psychological life. The phrase near to the knuckle also carries that sense of something being on the verge of acceptability or endurance. Maybe what's being suggested is that the burden is almost too much to bear. It's hitting so close to home, another idiom with a similar meaning, it's nearly unbearable. From a structural standpoint, having this idiom right before the final line sets up a figurative idea, something close and painful that then is hammered home by the concrete image of blood on hands. So now, the closing line. Great line, crucial in all of our essay responses if we are writing about remains. His bloody life in my bloody hands. It's maybe the most quoted line of the poem, and for good reason, because it operates on multiple levels. First, the word bloody does a kind of semantic double duty. Obviously, it can mean bloody as a common swear word or an intensifier. And that could be how the soldier is speaking here, an expression of anger, frustration, or emphasis. As in, my bloody hands, meaning my damn hands, or these, bloody hands of mine. At the same time, and very poignantly, bloody can be literal. The life of the looter was bloody, full of blood, gore, and certainly the death was, and it's on the speaker's hands, literally the blood splattered, metaphorically the guilt of murder. This layering of meaning makes the lines sting emotionally. It captures the soldier's rage, maybe at himself or at the situation, and remorse simultaneously. That phrase, bloody hands, also calls to mind, and given our study of Macbeth, it really should, that famous imagery of Shakespeare's Macbeth where after murdering King Duncan, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are racked with guilt, certainly Macbeth is, and they can't wash the blood from their hands. Remember, Lady Macbeth, towards the end of the play, cries out, "Damn spot." By ending on "my bloody hands," Armitage alludes to this really classic symbol of guilt, and a guilt that can't be erased. Making this intertextual link here is, I think, valuable. Just like Macbeth, the soldier can't escape the feeling that the blood of his victim will forever stain him. The difference is, Macbeth's guilt, of course, was over an unjust regicide for ambition, whereas here, the soldier's guilt is over killing in war, arguably a more morally ambiguous situation, tying back to probably armed, possibly not. Let's also break down the line grammatically to see its impact. His bloody life, the life of the looter, described as bloody. It suggests, of course, both the life taken, but also that life was bloody because a soldier made it so. Physically, after the shooting, the soldier's hands might literally have blood on them, but metaphorically, and I think this is really key, to have someone's life in your hands means you are responsible for whether they live or die. Here, he had the looter's life in his hands in that moment of deciding to shoot, and now that life ended is on his hands in terms of responsibility. By saying in, Armitage paints the image of the life, the blood, almost cupped in those hands, something he holds and he can't put down. It's a powerful, poetic way to portray guilt. He holds that man's life, now ended, forever, as a psychological burden. We should also note that this final line is delivered without ambiguity or euphemism. The soldier fully acknowledges it was his hands. Earlier, he used "we" and tried to maybe share out some of the blame, but "my bloody hands" is singular and personal. It's a moment of acceptance, or at least an unwilling confrontation with the truth that he holds himself accountable. It's a kind of climax of guilt. Throughout the poem, we saw hints of guilt, the repeated doubts, the nightmares, but now he states it plainly. I have blood on my hands. Bloody, repeated in quick succession, also, as I've said before, maybe conveys a degree of anger. Maybe it's self-directed. Maybe it sounds like a curse. Perhaps he's furious. He can't rid himself of this damned spot. So, to conclude, the final couplet ties together the poem's exploration of memory, guilt, and the lasting impact of conflict. It confirms that the speaker is psychologically scarred. The real remains of the title are not just the physical remnants of the looter and the blood on the street, but the remnants of that event that persist in the soldier's memory and maybe even in the soldier's soul. The use of colloquialism, bloody, if we think of it as a swear word, right alongside very powerful symbolic imagery, blood on hands, epitomizes Armitage's technique throughout the poem, blending the ordinary voice with extraordinary horror. The soldier's final realization is a really bleak one. He cannot undo what's done, and he carries the consequence intimately with him, here and now. So through today's podcast, through this episode, we've seen how remains unfold from an anecdotal war story into a really profound study of guilt and trauma, the kind of power of those two things. It's a poem that starts on a casual tone on another occasion, but ends with a man tormented by his past, his bloody life in my bloody hands. Think back to that opening scenario. The purpose of that immersive retelling at the start of this episode was to emotionally place you in the shoes of the speaker. Now, having gone through the poem analytically, I hope we can appreciate how skillfully Armitage has done the same sort of thing with his poetic craft. He's helped us imagine not just the adrenaline of the firefight, but the enduring nightmare afterwards. So as always, thank you so much for listening to this in-depth analysis of the poem Remains. I really hope it's deepened your understanding and appreciation of the poem, and I hope that it's helped you notice some of those key small textual details, the sort of textual details that can really push our responses in terms of quality, really improve them so that we can do the very best we can when it comes to the exam. So as always, thank you so much for listening. Make sure that you listen to this as part of your revision process, and I'll see you next time.